In 2020, the Federal Reserve created $5 trillion in 2 years. They didn't tax it. They didn't borrow it from China. They created it digitally with keystrokes. By spring 2022, the Fed's balance sheet had ballooned from $4 trillion to $9 trillion. Money conjured from nothing. Meanwhile, the IRS collected $4.9 trillion in taxes from American citizens in 2024 alone. That's about $14,600 per person. Money pulled directly from paychecks, savings accounts, and profits. So here's the question that breaks the entire system. If the Fed can create trillions by pressing buttons, why do we still pay taxes? This is the financial historian where money, power, and history collide, and nothing is ever as simple as it looks. The answer isn't what you've been told. Taxes don't fund the government the way you fund your rent. They do something far more important and far more sinister. They control you. To understand why, we need to go back to the moment money stopped being real. In 1971, President Nixon severed the dollar's last connection to gold. For the first time in history, the U.S. currency wasn't backed by anything physical. No gold reserves, no silver, just trust and a printing press. This was the birth of what economists call fiat money, currency that exists because the government says it does. The word fiat itself comes from Latin meaning let it be done. Money by decree. From that point forward, every dollar in circulation became a unit of debt. When the Federal Reserve creates money, it doesn't print it anymore. It types numbers into a computer. Those numbers become bank reserves. Banks use those reserves to create loans, and those loans become the money supply. During the 2008 financial crisis, the Fed invented a new term for this process: quantitative easing. In plain English, buying government bonds with money that didn't exist 5 seconds earlier. The Fed bought $4.5 trillion worth of assets between 2008 and 2014. Then during COVID-19, they did it again. $5 trillion more in just 2 years. That's nearly $10 trillion created out of thin air in little over a decade. This should terrify anyone holding dollars. Because if money can be created for free, yours is worth less every time they do it. But here's the paradox. Even with trillions in digital money creation, the government still collects nearly $5 trillion a year in taxes. Why? The standard answer is that taxes pay for government services: roads, schools, the military, Social Security. In 2024, the federal government spent $6.9 trillion. Since it only collected $4.9 trillion in taxes, it had to borrow the rest. That borrowing adds to the national debt, which now sits at over $38 trillion. So taxes help reduce the deficit. Except that's not really true. Think about it. If the Fed can create trillions digitally to buy bonds during a crisis, why does it need your paycheck to pay for highways? The government issues bonds. The Fed buys those bonds by creating reserves. The reserves become dollars. The dollars fund spending. At no point in that chain do your taxes actually matter for funding. So what are taxes really for? Here's the ugly truth. Taxes don't fund the government. Taxes give value to the currency. This is called modern monetary theory, and it flips everything you learned in economics class upside down. The logic goes like this. The government can print all the money it wants, but if nobody needs that money, it's worthless. How do you make people need money? You demand that they pay taxes in it. Every year, the IRS requires American citizens to pay taxes in US dollars. Not gold, not Bitcoin, dollars. That creates permanent demand for the currency. You need dollars to avoid prison, and because everyone needs dollars, dollars have value. Taxes are the floor, the baseline reason dollars matter. Without taxes, the currency becomes optional, and optional money is worthless money. Zimbabwe tried printing money without taxation. Venezuela tried it. Weimar Germany tried it. Every time the currency collapsed. But that's only half the story. The other function of taxes is darker. Taxes drain money from the economy. When the Fed creates trillions through quantitative easing, that money flows into the system. Too much money chasing too few goods creates inflation. Prices rise, your paycheck buys less. To counteract that, the government taxes. Every dollar they take from you is a dollar that can't bid up the price of groceries, rent, or gas. Taxation becomes a release valve. a way to keep inflation from exploding while the money printer runs 24/7. And who gets hit hardest? Not the wealthy. They own assets, stocks, bonds, real estate. When the Fed creates money, asset prices soar. The rich get richer, but the middle class, the people paid in wages, they get taxed. Their purchasing power gets drained. It's a closed loop. The Fed prints money. Asset prices rise. Wealth concentrates at the top. Then the government taxes the middle and working classes to prevent runaway inflation from that money creation. The system isn't broken. It's designed this way. But here's where it gets even stranger. In December 2024, the Federal Reserve announced it would begin purchasing $40 billion in Treasury securities every month through a program they called reserve management. Fed Chair Jerome Powell insisted this wasn't quantitative easing, but let's call it what it is. More money creation, $40 billion a month adds up to $200 billion by spring. And this is happening while inflation remains above the Fed's 2% target. The Fed claims it's managing reserves to ensure liquidity before tax day in April 2025. But simple math reveals the scale. They're injecting hundreds of billions while simultaneously cutting interest rates. If the Fed were serious about fighting inflation, they'd do the opposite. They drain money from the system, not create more. So why do they do it? Because the alternative is collapse. The entire financial system runs on confidence. Confidence that dollars have value. Confidence that debts will be honored. Confidence that the machine keeps turning. If the Fed stops creating money, banks run out of reserves. Credit freezes. The economy contracts. Unemployment spikes. Politicians lose elections. The machine must keep running. And taxes are the oil that keeps the gears from grinding to a halt. They give the currency legitimacy. They drain excess money to manage inflation, and they ensure the population stays dependent on the system. There's a reason the IRS doesn't accept gold, land, or hours of labor. They demand dollars, because dollars are the only thing that keeps the government in power. And as long as you owe taxes in dollars, you'll keep working for dollars. You'll keep accepting dollars. You'll keep believing dollars have value. That belief is the foundation. Without it, the $9 trillion balance sheet, the $38 trillion national debt, and the $5 trillion in annual tax collection all evaporate into the fiction they've always been. Money isn't real. It's a collective hallucination. But it's a hallucination backed by the most powerful enforcement mechanism in history, the threat of prison for anyone who stops playing along. So the next time you write a check to the IRS, remember this. You're not funding the government. You're validating the currency. You're accepting the rules of a game where the house always wins because the house prints the chips. The Fed creates money to keep the system liquid. Taxes destroy money to keep it valuable. And you, caught in the middle, work your entire life converting hours into dollars that lose value the moment they're created. That's not a bug. That's the feature. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.